Our intersectional mission to eliminate racism and empower women demands that we show up to advocate against the oppression that many groups and individuals endure, including through recognizing the interconnected experiences of discrimination and disadvantage that women face from their overlapping identities. Too often, stereotypes, biases, and racial power dynamics are embedded in our laws and public policies. They are also reflected in the use of racial profiling, heightened surveillance tactics, targeted enforcement strategies, and other practices that increase policing of certain racial and ethnic communities, but not others, that lead to the criminalization and often the death of people of color. The movement that is YWCA demands a world of equity and human decency. We envision a world that holds equal promise for every person. We stand in solidarity with our community members against racial injustice, and we work toward a world where equality exists in every facet of our society. We commit ourselves to the work of racial justice, and that commitment is shown in this virtual series that you will experience tonight, the second part. And you can see what our core values as an organization are. We're committed to drive change, to listen, to facilitate discussion, to support, and most importantly, to act. So with that, I turn you over to the wonderful hands of Kelly Grosser. And I hope that you have a great session this evening.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Stacy did take a moment to introduce our advocacy team, and so I'm so proud to be a part of this work. Again, my name is Kelly Grosser. I'm the Youth Empowerment Director at YWCA, so I have a fabulous team of facilitators and educators that are in the community working on health and wellness and leadership for all of the youth in our Tri-County area. And I've also found myself positioned in the advocacy team along with Cherie and Ashley, doing a lot of work around implicit bias, both in our education systems and in other organizational structures as a whole. And so we were just going to take a second just so everyone can introduce themselves. I guess I just would say that I don't know that I necessarily came to this work with intention. I've always studied and been interested in the conversation. But it was through experience, really, that working with a diverse number of youth, working with a diverse organization, and then also working in public places where I had the assumption of a shared experience and a shared belief that eliminating racism was agreed, and that really wasn't the case. And so that really inspired me and really lit the fire to say, like, I'm even in spaces where I am the majority and with people that look like me and maybe have similar backgrounds to me, that they could not make the assumption that we're all coming from the same place. And so it might have been naive of me, but I'm so grateful to be a part of this and to be able to use that momentum that we've created to people who are here in the space with us. So I appreciate you being here, and I can't wait to hear what your experiences have been and as we share through the journey. So thank you. Ashley, if you would love to, Ashley and Cherie, if you could introduce yourselves, that would be fantastic.
Oh, thank you, Kelly, and good evening, everyone. So my name is Ashley Faison. I'm the Advocacy and Volunteer Manager, as well as the Director of our Foster Grandparent Program at YWCA. I'm honored to be a part of our advocacy team, and I'm so thankful that you've all decided to join us this evening. Like Kelly, I would say the work didn't bring me to the YWCA. I was actually nominated within our Exceptional Women's ceremony a few years back before being employed with the YWCA. But what stuck out to me that I just couldn't shake and couldn't get away from was our strong mission. At that time, it was something that I kind of kept thinking about, and being born here and raised in Pottstown, I was not sure of all the work that was happening locally, right on King Street in my own backyard. And I kind of continued to watch the YWCA and what they were doing in the community, and I saw the changes that were happening. But now, as being part of their team, I'm learning something new, just like Kelly said, every day. This work here is is purposeful. It's work that, you know, that resonates with just me outside of work. I am one whose life journey is to give a voice to the voiceless, and it just strengthens me each day to be able to work within an organization that does that day in and day out. So thank you all again. Again, Ashley Faison, and here's Cherie McDonald.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So again, I am Cherie McDonald. Most of you are familiar with me, but I am the Chief Mission Impact Officer. And I oversee a number of programs within the organization. Both Ashley's team and Kelly's team fall under my umbrella. I am excited to be here. I will let you know that, you know, this work is not easy work, and it's not always exciting. But as we have crises and we have to react and do reactive advocacy, we are re-energized and challenged. I came to the YW really joining forces with Stacy Woodland. We go back quite a few years to another organization, and it wasn't until my first national conference meeting with YWUSA that I was just like, you know what, I'm here for a reason. So with that, I'm grateful. I'm always eager to learn. I'm hopeful that we will learn from each other, we will teach each other, and we will grow together and continue in a fight together. So thank you so much, and welcome aboard and buckle up for the ride.
I'm sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. So before we get started, I just want to share with you our 4 agreements of courageous conversation that will carry us through this evening. And then for each meeting that we have together, we ask that you all stay engaged. And that means really remaining morally, emotionally, intellectually, and socially involved in the dialogue. Just understanding and being okay that you're going to experience some discomfort, and that this is a norm, and it acknowledges that discomfort is inevitable in these dialogues and these conversations around race. We also ask that participants make a commitment to bring issues into the open. That means, you know, if you have a question, don't sit on it. We will have some Q&A towards the end that we ask that you bring your issues and your concerns and your questions to the safe space. It is not talking about these issues that create divisiveness. The divisiveness already exists in the society, in our schools, and just in our workplaces and whatnot. Through dialogue, even when uncomfortable, healing can begin to change. It can begin to take place. We ask that you speak your truth, meaning to be open and about the thoughts and feelings that you have, and not just saying what you think that we may want to hear or the other people in the room may want to hear. And we also want you, I really want you to pay close attention to that last agreement, and that we expect and accept non-closure. This conversation will not leave you with every unanswered question that you have. This agreement asks participants to just kind of hang out in that uncertainty and to not rush to quick solutions, especially in relation to racial understanding, which of course, you know, it's definitely going to require ongoing dialogue. This is just a start. For some of you, it may not be your first step, but there may be someone in the room that this is their first step to this conversation. And we just want to be transparent in knowing that please just expect and accept some non-closure. Thank you.
So you can see on your screen, there's an agenda posted. So we've met Stacy and we've heard from our advocacy team. Ashley just shared the conversation lines. And so what we're really using tonight for is to just connect with everyone and have be in some shared space together. I just want to be sure that you understand how the platform works. So if you could, if you're on a computer, select participants, you should see a window open on the right side of your screen. And that will give you a list of everyone who's here. And down at the bottom of the right hand, the bottom of that participant screen, there's a button that says raise hand. And I just want to see if everybody could raised. Can anyone raise their hand on there? Oh, I see them. Good job. Okay, so you can see it there, and then you can lower your hand as well in the same space. Thank you for that, just so we can verify that it's working. And so we're going to ask for some movement in the chat. So again, along the bottom bar of the main screen of Zoom, when you select chat, you will see an opportunity to respond to everyone. And so we're really using tonight just to, again, find out who's in the space. We're going to ask a couple of general questions just so that you can kind of own what you're bringing into the space. If you have, you know, a history of having conversations around racial equity, if this is the first time you're having this conversation, we hope that we're affecting people from all different backgrounds, right? And that we all have different levels of understanding. It is our plan that moving forward, we'll be breaking out into smaller groups and having more articulate conversations. But just so you know, this is where we're starting. So really, those were the big things about Zoom that we wanted to make sure everybody was aware of. And so we're going to let Cherie's going to start actually and start processing a couple of questions with you all. And I think I'm breaking up. Okay. All right. So I'm going to switch my Wi-Fi connection, but I'm going to let Cherie go ahead and take over and start the question of just finding out who's in the space.
So I'm not sure if everybody heard clearly what Kelly was saying. I know she was breaking up really bad on my end, but as we are going to communicate through this next few questions, I'm just going to ask that you all put your answers in the chat box. So I really would like to know, where's everyone from? Who's in a room? Who are we serving? So if you could just really put what area you're representing right now, I would greatly appreciate it. Royersford, Pottstown. Oh, Pittsburgh, nice. Audubon. Wonderful. So it looks like we have a large representation from Pottstown. We have some Lansdale, Douglasville, Pittsburgh. It looks like it's the furthest. Am I missing anyone else? My boss, who's from Audubon but always represents Philadelphia. Anyone else? So I am from Royersford. I think our first person said Royersford. That was Ash Johnston. I am from Royersford as well, but I am born and raised in Philadelphia. I've lived in Texas, and I've come back up to the East Coast now. I've been back here probably close to 20 years. But I say all of that to say that our experiences and our life experiences they all speak to who we are. They all speak to our understanding. They all speak to why we do what we do. So as we're having these conversations and as we're diving deep into this literature, I want us to keep that in mind. You know, one of the things that I struggled with when I moved to Texas was that I felt like you knew who was against you in Texas, but I was used to being in Philadelphia where you didn't necessarily know. So that was a huge adjustment for me. And coming from Philadelphia and coming up to Royersford and really seeing the Confederate flag displayed so overtly and not being used to that was a culture shock for me. And it was some things that I had to keep in mind and consider when I brought my children up here and they were commuting back and forth to school, is really recognizing where we live at now and where we're going and how to become acclimated and adjusting and how to really conduct themselves in a socially appropriate way. It really one of the words that you are familiar with or may not be, but we'll hear is teaching them how to code switch and really how to survive in Philly and how to survive up here. So as we're going and having these conversations, just know wherever you come from, it speaks to where you are and where you're going. But really, we have to figure out how to exist in the same space, in a safe space, and a progressive space. So that's the ultimate goal.
All right, so I do want to put a question out around our comfort in having these conversations about race. So if you can go to the chat box, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not very comfortable, 5 being very comfortable, how comfortable are you with having these discussions and talking about race? Nice. Nice. Thank you. So I see just a few, but I would say for the most part, I see a lot of 4s, mostly 4s and 5s. So again, like when having these conversations about race, when having them, it can unearth strong emotions and misunderstandings. Sometimes we hear comments or ideas that are confusing, and some may be hurtful or marginalizing. We want to build understanding and empathy for one another. We want to make sure that that we share how we feel in these conversations, as I mentioned before, and ask and speak up when we need more clarity on certain topics. A few more suggested norms that I would say is, I would ask you to be honest with yourself in the group during these discussions, to investigate your overthinking, challenge notions. We also, whenever possible, we want to make sure that we're speaking from an I perspective and your own experiences, and avoiding speaking for others when we have these conversations as well. And lastly, I would say, again, I'll keep pointing out that towards the end, we'll always leave time for Q&A, and just asking them questions, help me understand, and asking for help. We ask that you please not to sit in on anything. As I also mentioned, we may not have every answer for you, and it is okay to kind of sit out in that uncertainty, but maybe someone in the room may have some support for you as well. So thank you. Kelly?
I switched my Wi-Fi network. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, better. I apologize. I thought I had it figured out. So thank you for that. I think it really gives us a place to start from when we understand what people are bringing into the space. And I think we just really want to think about, right, we're assuming positive intent. We're assuming that if we're taking the time to show up in conversation, it's because we want to be part of the conversation. We want to be part of the change. We don't want to be part of the oppression. So I think it's important that we acknowledge there's a difference between agreeing and understanding, and really just seeking understanding, right? Not just to say like, yeah, I agree with that, but really trying to understand where are people coming from. And I think that for, I'm clearly a white woman. I grew up in Pottstown as well, so I'm constantly in and out of diverse populations. I think I find myself often in conversations where I don't have 4s and 5s on the list. I think there are a lot of people that I come in contact with that might be 1s and 2s. They aren't interested. They don't have the language. I love that we're working in space where we have language developed. And I think what I really just want to think about in terms of this book and this study is that this is a starting point, right? Like we chose this book because I found it to be a really useful guide journey. It felt like it really kind of gave me an enlightenment around some issues that I maybe didn't have language for. And so I don't want to get stuck in the position of like, we're centering the conversation around white people, and that can be dangerous because centering conversations might lead us to think that there's a space for that. But really hoping that we start to be able to recognize how the systems of racism are, you know, what do we do? What part do we play to uphold them? Even if it's right, probably unconsciously, but what does it look like? Where can I find it in my everyday life? What does it sound like in the conference room? What does it look like at the grocery store? How does it appear at the Little League field with my son, right? And also how we can interrupt them. So what does it sound like for someone to step out of their comfort zone in a public space and say, you know, let me enlighten you, or could I share a thought with you, or would you be interested in having a conversation with me? So again, coming back to those things. So I want you to take a second and really be thoughtful and sort of internalize the concept of, if you have a fear, and this is, I mean, this is really when we talk about fear and we talk about vulnerability, I don't think we can separate those two things from conversations about race in mixed space. I think it can feel very scary for some people. For me, you know, doing harm to another unintentionally is one of my greatest fears. Like I just am I care so much about every human being, and the thought that my words could be so critically hurtful to someone that's my biggest fear. I want to press you for a minute to think. You're comfortable having conversations about race, but what is it that scares you about the conversations? I think that many of us might feel inspired and motivated, and we might feel like we have the language, but I have this belief that underneath that there is still a little bit of trepidation over how to have the conversation, around how to follow the rules, right? Do I know the rules? Am I using the right language? Did I say something that hurt someone's feelings? Am I leaning too much on my friends of color? Am I asking too many questions? Am I doing enough reading, right? All these things that we constantly, I think, are finding ourselves circling around. So I would love for you to put in the chat, if you had to articulate, when I know we're pushing this group into a very quick, vulnerable space. And so we're hoping that just by showing up here, you're willing to participate in this conversation. What is the biggest fear that you face around having conversations around race? And then I am going to ask that if you're comfortable talking about it just for a minute, that you raise your hand, and we would love to hear from a couple of people just what the experience has been for you. So thank you, Stacey, for putting that in there. So go ahead in the chat, drop it in there. What is the fear? What is the thing that sometimes catches you? I'm going to give you a minute to process. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And if you have an answer, feel free to still add your answer. I think we can see a lot of commonalities here, and I love that, right? Like, we are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike, for sure. We have these similar worries and fears that we carry with us. And I think sometimes that fear of offending equals silence. And that's, right, the moderate white, right? Especially from my perspective, my lack of willingness to use my voice in spite of my discomfort can exist. I have to be okay with moving forward. And I think that was letters from the Birmingham jail, where Martin Luther King talked about that the moderate white could be one of the most dangerous things. And so we need to work in groups like this to know that we have a collective effort and a conversation and a common language, that we are out here doing the work together, that no one of us is alone, and that we are connected with others. And my hope for this community is that we stay connected and that we're able to come into discourse like this. So I'm just going to kind of run down here. Yeah, for sure. Being misunderstood, offending people, right? And it is ignorance at times, but also, right, it's not intentional. And a lot of times, you know, it comes from the systems that we were grown in and that we were born and raised in, that the ignorance was just embedded. So we're facing that. Absolutely, unintentionally saying the wrong thing. And again, I think that often leads to silence, and that's really our goal, is to break through that. saying the wrong thing, hurting someone with ignorant, unintentionally saying something that would be misunderstood, right? That someone wouldn't see your true intentions. At work, definitely looking through to see that sometimes at work it's different. And then also that agree to disagree piece. And I have that in my family sometimes. And there are folks that I can sit eye to eye and they can have a conversation with me. And there are some that unfortunately I can't. And so making those decisions is always challenging. We certainly don't want to cause harm. We're not trying to minimize struggles, barriers, problems. I love that. Yeah, fear of not knowing what we're talking about, or not knowing how to say, like, I feel ignorant about this. I don't know what to say, or I don't think I have the language. That you'll make assumptions based on experiences. Absolutely, right? We know what the media has. We have a lot of experiences in our organization that have led to that, where we get to sit at the table and say, like, this is how I perceived it, and this is how I perceived it, and these might be the reasons why. And so creating space for those conversations is important. Tend to not initiate the conversation. Absolutely. So, right, where do we stand on the spectrum of our willingness to step out of our comfort zones? Becoming angry with people who have narrow-minded, right, can be very frustrating. Yes, how do you start the conversation? And it is our hope that through these meetings, you'll have some language for that. We're trying to build a toolkit in our community that you have access to. Right, standing up, saying something, being assertive, which for some of us who might be passive people, that's an extra layer of challenge. Not wanting to say the wrong thing. So is there anybody here who's willing to speak for a second about that fear? Or if you've ever had, I don't know, maybe there's a reason you have the fear. Maybe you had an experience that you spoke out and it came back to you in a way that was hurtful or scary. Anyone willing to, I don't know if I can see all the hands. So if anyone's willing to speak or share their experience.
I'm willing to share. Myra Forrest.
Okay, fantastic. Hi, I see you. Okay,
Hi.
Absolutely. Please share.
Something really unbelievable happened to me over sharing things like this. I was superintendent of Owen J. Roberts School District, and I was actually fired. And one of the reasons I believe was because I spoke up to the school board about things that they were saying that I felt were very wrong. And I actually filed a lawsuit against the school district, and I eventually won 4 years later, but it didn't do anything to bring my job back. But I'm going to give you an example of something that the school board, some members said. One time they said to me that they didn't want me buying coffee from the Dunkin' Donuts down from Owen J. Roberts because it's made by those towel heads. Then another time they were talking about the fact that they were going to Harrah's in Chester, and the one school board member said to the other, I can't stand to go there anymore because there's too many jungle bunnies there. And I spoke up about those things and said what I felt. I said that it's so wrong and I don't want to hear this. And I ended up losing my job. So some very serious things can happen to you if you do stand up for what you believe.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And we're certainly seeing more of the same in the current media and in our school leadership at times, and certainly in our school boards and the way that they're using social media and their platforms. And it's happening again in the very same district. And so I'm very aware.
That district can never get itself together. I don't know what the problem is, but seriously, they have some serious racial issues there.
So I appreciate that. And I'm sure that was a long-term and challenging personal struggle for you to work through all of those things. And, I had a similar experience in another local school district where we were invited, the YW was invited in to give a presentation to the senior high, to the students on, racial equity and justice. And so we did so, and we did it in two different assemblies, and at the time the superintendent happened to be a man of color, and we had the principal was a white man, and they were both present for both of the assemblies, and they applauded us and they were pleased, and they understood that they might invoke some conversation and some flurry and some attention, and they did very quickly, and it really took on a kind of a life of its own in the community in terms of social media and what was happening, and it was my work, so I was very personally affected by it, and I had the fortunate and so much gratitude to this day to be surrounded by an organization like the YW who was willing to stand up with me. And it sounds like Myra, you might not have had that same benefit where people were willing to stand with you, and that made all the difference, right? I sometimes wonder if I would have survived it. But that's trauma, and you live with that, and you've had to witness it and see it, and you care for children and students. And so I'm definitely empathetic to how it feels when your own work, when you're trying to do the right thing by people and students, is misunderstood or misconstrued in a way that, you know, reflects negatively on you. Thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else have any comments or thoughts? And it doesn't need to be that you had, you know, an immense experience, but perhaps just, you know, your fear in a whole, where do you think your fear comes from? Where do you think that, do you think it's generational? Do you think it came from your family? Do you feel like it's the community that you live in?
Craig has his hand up, Kelly.
Okay, can you unmute? Go ahead, go for it. I can't see everyone's hand, so thank you.
Go ahead, Craig.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess, I mean, I think in general, I have a fear of saying the wrong thing and offending people. But I think it's just a comfort level for me too. Like, I'm just not, like, I don't have many people in my life, you know, that are of a different race. And so I don't have those, like, I don't have those conversations. I don't have that, you know, opportunities to have those conversations. And so, yeah, you know, no close friends or, you know, acquaintances. So I think for me, it's like just a comfort level to engage in those conversations. So, I mean, I'll stop there, but.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you could raise your hands to say how many of you agree or have a similar scenario as Craig, where you just don't really have, I mean, I count among my blessings my work at the YW. Again, I didn't come to the work through the mission, but now I am the mission, right? And I've been so fortunate to be in that space, and that's not lost on me. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of us have that scenario, and I think that many of us may, and I really want to be cautious. I don't want to overgeneralize or make assumptions. I can only speak for myself, but I recognize that growing up, I really didn't have an opportunity to have those conversations. The conversation around diversity when I was a young girl and with my family, not that it was anti or for or against, it just wasn't. It just wasn't present. And so I think part of us, you know, having to develop the language, many of us feel like we're starting with nothing, right? And we're building from something. And that is why I love this text so much, because I think it gives you, my hope is that it might give you a language and an understanding over something that it's hard to get elsewhere, right? So I would encourage you all to assume there's something to learn. I love that we have so many 4s and 5s in there, but I really am hoping that despite your 5, you're still assuming there's going to be some powerful conversation and learning to be had in this group. And so thank you for that. Anyone else? Last thought? Anyone else have something they would love to?
Ash Johnston has her hand raised.
Hi, Ash. Oh, hi.
Hi. I just want to echo on the family part. I think that part, just to what you just said about there just wasn't a conversation, though there were a lot of built-in assumptions and things that were just like unconsciously there. And you know, your family is part of your like protection, right? And so when we reach this pandemic and now we have all this kind of tension going on, I feel like I've lost part of my pack, right? Part of my like social structure, part of my people who were always there for me. And I'm really struggling fundamentally to be like, wait a second, like, you raised me and I don't understand how we can be so different. So I think I'm most looking forward to trying to figure out how to, like, I don't know, be okay with the unrest, be okay in the ambiguity, and also not want to just write off certain people that are, I like, fundamentally I'm just struggling so hard for. So
Mm.
Can I jump in for 1 second? It's Stacy.
Please do.
I was gonna say that, so that doesn't not only happen in white families. So it happens in Black families for sure. I grew up, and the most discussions that were about race when I was growing up were, scary, about the dangers of being, amongst white people. They used to say, my parents used to say, amongst the whites. So that used to be kind of what they said. And then I went to a school in Philadelphia that was very multicultural, and like not my neighborhood school, and the same for the high school. And, and I dated all kinds of people. And, my family had a hard time with that. And we had a lot of discussion. So I think, race in your household, how race is discussed in your household, it has a familiar theme in many just mono-ethnic households, right? If you're all one race in that household, there's a lot of discussion that is intended to keep you safe from the other races, no matter which race you're in. So I would share that. I think that it's an important distinction to understand that I absolutely feel differently than my parents did, and then some of my extended family. And I had very close friends who were of all ethnicities, and that helped me, I believe, share and teach my parents some things that were different. And I think it's important in 2020 that if you are in a place where you don't have a lot of exposure to other cultures, it's important to get there. And I think, quite frankly, the coronavirus won't make that easy, but it doesn't make it impossible, because look at us right now.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah, Ashley, I hear you. And I mean, I have a similar experience, and there are right in our own relationships and our spaces, we've been called to kind of reflect, and like you said, fundamentally may recognize that we're not where we thought we were. And I think a lot of people are probably in a similar space right now. And that, I mean, really is bringing us to the conversation around the text. So I want to just kind of move into the white fragility of the book. I hope that everyone received an email from Sarah Stump today, our marketing coordinator. She did a great job of kind of outlining what's to come and what to be expected, but I kind of wanted to just review it with you as well. And I think that, Cherie, you may have a slide with some dates and information. I think that there is some criticism around this text, because when you center, and again, I mean, Stacy, I think one of the things that you said that had been already kind of in my mind is that for some people, there is just no conversation around race, right? Like it's just, and so often, and I think what Robin DiAngelo does a good job of kind of identifying or helping us to understand is that it's almost as though we are without race at times. And so that can be a dangerous place to be. And I don't want to discredit the fact that there are many, many, many amazing artists and writers and authors and professors doing amazing work that you could easily select to read in addition to this, and we'll be making recommendations for those things as well. I recognize that it can be dangerous for us to focus on a conversation about how do white people talk about race, because it centers us again in the center of the conversation. And that is not equitable in terms of our broader conversation, but I think I have found for myself at least that it did give me some language again and the ability to start to really like step out, and that's my hope that it will do the same for you. And again, we're really trying to use it to expose what's happening, not so much to protect us. And so I think as long as we keep coming at this work with that structure and with that intention, that is what will occur here. I would love to say we originally had over 60 people signed up for this call tonight. And so we were a little cautious about how to structure it because we weren't totally certain what to expect, but I love, what we're seeing here. We will be moving into more smaller group conversations in our next setting. So we will be talking in smaller groups, and it is our hope that many of you will come and be willing to share your experiences and to ask the questions. And I think Cherie maybe said, like, we may not have all the answers. I suspect I have not many of the answers, but I can certainly share my experience, and I can certainly help you find answers if we can't get you there. And so just really thinking about this is a starting point. This is not, I studied white fragility with the YWCA over a 12-week period, and now I can talk about race, right? Like, this is not the ending. This is the beginning. And so we applaud you for being here. We appreciate you being in our space. On the screen right now, there are some dates to remember. So if you recall, when you initially signed up for this program, it was a 4-week, very quick study. And I think, like many, we were really wanting to get something out and available to people as soon as possible. And now that we've been able to take a step back and reflect, made some conscious decisions to expand it a little bit so that we can have more thoughtful space and conversations with you all, but also so that you have some time to internalize and reflect and move out into your world and start to look for evidence of the things that we're going to be discussing and exposing. My hope is that it will change the way we think and the way that we view things, and you start to see you start to see it in your everyday life, and then it does become easier to talk about because it's clear and it's blatant and it's visible to you. So we are going to, for our next session, which will be on Monday, the 20th of July, if you have the text, we would love for you to be prepared by reading the introduction and chapters 1 and 2. I do not suggest that you sit down and read the whole thing at once. I really think that you need to digest it and marinate on it a little bit. I mean, the first chapter alone could take a couple days just to really, like, I have to internalize this process that she's describing, and some of it might catch you off guard. And Peggy McIntosh has a wonderful article about what's in your knapsack that she wrote years ago, but it really talks about our stamina for these conversations, right? That because we don't have them frequently, and because, like Craig said, many of us don't have an opportunity to have them really ever, we want to be respectful of your needs and of you feeling safe in the space, and also really allow you to be able to apply it outside of our work. So you can see on the screen the introduction, chapter 1 and 2, and then essentially it will be 2 chapters bi-weekly until we get to the end on September 28th. There was another book that was selected that was in our original schedule. We will be covering that book in the future, but we're going to take some time with this and really go through by the time we get to chapters 11 and 12, it's really looking at, so now what, right? Like, what's next? How do I take action with this? And so that's the schedule we're going to follow. Sarah will be sending this out again with the chapter assignments as well. And we're also going to send, there's a brief, we often at the YW use a program called Teaching Tolerance. There's an organization that does a lot of really spectacular work around how to teach children and students and anybody who's learning to be inclusive in our education. So Robin D'Angelo sat down with Teaching Tolerance and did a 30-minute interview with them. And so we're going to share that link with you as well if you're interested or if you have time to watch it. I think it's really beneficial because it helps you position the conversation and start to understand where she came from, kind of like we just did here tonight with us, but kind of what her experience was and how she got there and what makes her, what gives her the language or the right to have this conversation and why it's working. So you can look for that link. You can look for reading those chapters. I think Sarah did a beautiful job of describing, if you weren't able to get the book, if you don't have time to read the book, please show up anyway. The conversations that we're going to have will be based on questions that you will be able to think through and process and respond to. Clearly, reading is, I was an English teacher before I got into this work, so I always say, like, it's the difference between looking at the cupcake and tasting the cupcake. I mean, we all really want to taste the cupcake. You have to read to get the full effect. However, looking at a cupcake isn't so bad, right? So if that's the best you can do, we want you to have grace with yourself, be realistic about your schedules. We're just, showing up on these Mondays would be really, that's the best thing. And then, like I said, we'll break up into smaller groups so that it will be more of you talking and less of me talking. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Cherie. I appreciate the conversation. She's going to just go through a couple more things and we're going to get everyone on their way. But appreciate spending the time with you and your willingness to show up and be in conversation with us. I feel fortunate to have this time. Cherie.
Yes. So before we move on, I just want to make sure, did everyone have an opportunity to note those dates and the chapters? If not, please feel free to raise your hand in the chat box, or raise your hand or put a comment in the chat box. We're all good? Good. So I just really want to give opportunity. We really wanted to just have an overview of what to look forward to make sure that you are walking away with clarity and next steps. So if you have any questions, this is your opportunity. Please feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand and ask those questions, and one of us will do our best to answer those questions. Okay. So Lori, you would like to stay with the study. What do I do next? We will include you and on the future emails, and you'll get the link and you can join us. And for 9/28, we will be discussing the final 2 chapters, which is 11 and 12. We will have our reflection and our closure. That was Jen's question. Any other questions? The other thing I wanted to mention as well is, just so you know, this is probably 5 minutes in tonight's discussion, I started recording. I did it belatedly, and my apologies for that. I wanted to make sure that we are recording these sessions for 2 reasons. One, if you want to go ahead and ask for the recording just so you can revisit what we discussed about, we can share it with you. And secondly, if someone was unable to participate in a session, but they still want to be a part of it, we want to make sure that we can give them what they have missed. So hopefully that works well for everyone. If it doesn't, please feel free to email one of us separately and we can discuss some other options, figure out what other options we may have.
Cherie, I saw a hand raised. I'm not sure if Kathy wanted to share something.
Kathy, did you want to say something?
The original schedule talked about movie discussion, those things. So those things, what I'm understanding is those things have changed, and now we are focusing on the book White Fragility. Is that what's happening?
So yes and no. So if you recall, we had 2 webinar series. One was, all of it's based around racism, trauma, and what's next. So we had our first webinar series about a week and a half ago. We have our second webinar series. That date has been moved until the 15th. So that's going to happen next Wednesday. We also have 2 book series. So this White Fragility is the first one, and the second one is So You Want to Talk About Race. That one was supposed to start the first Monday of August, but we wanted to give this book the time that is necessary for everyone to really have an opportunity to reflect and digest it. So we're going to be starting So You Want to Talk About Race sometime in the fall. Just to make sure we get through this book, especially for those who want to do more than 1 book series. We do realize that we are showing 2 movies there is a conflict with one of the movies. We recognize that today. So we're gonna probably take an assessment as we get closer to that movie day to see if we should reschedule the movie or reschedule this book series to figure out how many people plan on participating in that movie analysis and if it really needs to be adjusted. So we are still going to make sure that we cover everything that we've advertised for, but we might have to move some dates to make sure that everyone's able to fit it into their calendars. The other piece that I have to say is that, you know, we have to give ourselves grace, and some of this stuff gets really heavy and emotionally draining for you all and for us. So we have to make sure, in order to do it well, that we take our time and do it well, and we take our time, because although it may cause triggers for you, it causes triggers for my team as well. So we have to make sure that we're able to come with our whole self and not a broken one, so we can have a real open conversation. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions that I might have missed? Okay, great.
No.
We're doing great on time. We kind of anticipated this first meeting would be about an hour. I will tell you that our meetings going forward are probably going to be a minimum of an hour and a half to 2 hours. So it'll probably be from that 6 to 8 o'clock time frame to really make sure we give opportunity and room for conversation, reflection, and thoughtful dialogue. Okay. All right. Ash is going to close us up, and then I'm going to bid everyone a wonderful week.
Nice. So again, I just want to thank you all for joining us. I noticed for some, I saw a lot of 5s and a lot of 4s, but as Stacy mentioned, or Kelly, I believe it was, to just come into the room willing to learn and grow with us. I even just in the chat box, I saw a lot of vulnerability tonight, and we really appreciate it, and we thank you all. Us as a YWCA, we are a family. We are that persimmon family. That persimmon is our orange color. But we ask that you come with the equity lens on, your eyes open and being vulnerable and open to learning and growing and being vulnerable with us each and every Monday, and for our other sessions if you do join us. And I want to leave you with just a small little saying that my grandmother used to say to me all the time. When I was younger, I was a very anxious child. I don't know. I don't think it left me too much, but she would just say, relax your shoulders and take a deep breath. And like, as I catch myself and, with everything that's going on in the world right now, every night I'm like, okay, all right, Mama, all right, I'm going to relax my shoulders and just kind of take that deep breath and just let go of some of this tension so I can get a good night's sleep. So again, I thank you all. We look forward to seeing all of your faces again. I love it this way, so we can connect and get to know one another. Again, thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Many thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. See you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Stace, Kelly, Ash, stay on for a sec. I guess it's just you and I, Kelly. They left us.